The mafia boss's fiancée slapped the black waitress. What happened next made the restaurant freeze. She did not see the hand coming. One moment the dining room of Bella Vita was glowing with warm golden light, crystal chandeliers shimmering above linen-covered tables, violins playing softly from the corner. The next moment, a sharp crack shattered the elegance as a palm struck across the cheek of a young black waitress named Alana. Her tray clattered to the floor, silverware bouncing against the hardwood like tiny metallic echoes of humiliation. Every table went silent for a breathless second. The fiancé of the most feared man in the city stood over Alana, breathing hard, her perfectly manicured hand still trembling from the force of what she had done. Her gown shimmered like liquid diamonds under the lights, but her voice cut through the room colder than ice. "How dare you spill water near me? Do you even realize who I am?" Alana could only stand frozen, her dark eyes wide, the heat from the slap spreading across her cheek. She had worked double shifts all week long, swallowing insults from rude customers, sending half her paycheck back home to help with her grandmother's medication. But this moment felt different. This was humiliation threaded with cruelty, delivered in front of strangers whose whispers were already slicing into her. She dropped to her knees instinctively, not out of submission, but because her legs simply gave out. The sting in her cheek pulsed like a reminder that even in a room filled with luxury, dignity could be stolen in the blink of an eye. The fiancée lifted her chin, her voice rising as if she were performing for the entire restaurant. "Someone like you should know your place." People gasped softly, forks paused in midair, but no one moved. They were too shocked, too afraid, too unsure of what line had just been crossed. Alana kept her gaze lowered, her breath shaking, her thoughts racing with a single silent plea that had kept her surviving for years. Stay quiet. Stay invisible. Endure just a moment longer. But as she reached for the fallen silverware with trembling fingers, she sensed something shift in the atmosphere. A new silence settled over the restaurant. Heavy, focused, dangerous. She did not need to look up to know someone had just entered the room. Someone whose presence could change everything. And in that breath, before the truth revealed itself, before the entire dining room would freeze in fear and disbelief, Alana felt the weight of every pair of eyes on her small, kneeling frame. The night was about to turn. The question was how. As the slap echoed through the room, the silence was almost unbearable. Alana remained on her knees, eyes lowered, trying to steady her breath, trying to force her mind to shut down the overwhelming humiliation that was crashing over her like a tidal wave. Her heart pounded in her chest, a drumbeat of shock and anger she could barely contain. But before she could react, she heard it, the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps. The air in the room seemed to shift as the weight of power entered. Alana didn't need to look up to know who it was. She could feel the presence of the man everyone feared, the one who had built an empire on strength, ruthlessness, and silence. Mafia boss Dominic Romano had arrived. He stood at the edge of the room, towering over the crowd, his dark eyes scanning the scene with an intensity that could freeze the blood of anyone who dared meet his gaze. For a moment, time seemed to slow down. The restaurant's elegant chandeliers, the gold-leafed walls, the perfectly set tables, all of it blurred in Alana's vision as the world around her honed in on one figure, Dominic Romano. His reputation alone was enough to make grown men tremble. He was ruthless, strategic, and feared by anyone who dared cross him. But in that moment, he was a man with a decision to make. And everyone in the room knew that whatever choice he made next would change everything. Dominic's eyes flicked toward his fiancée, still standing with her hand raised in the air, a smirk playing at her lips, unaware of the storm she had just unleashed. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched at his sides. There was something about the way Alana had been treated, something so fundamentally wrong about a person being humiliated like this in front of so many that it ignited something in him he hadn't expected. He wasn't a man given to acts of mercy, but what he saw in Alana's eyes, a mixture of defiance, resignation, and a quiet strength, stirred something deep inside him. He had built his empire on power and fear. But in that instant, something deeper than that surged to the surface. Alana, still kneeling, didn't dare raise her gaze, but she could feel the change in the atmosphere. The air was thick with tension, the quiet before the storm. She felt her heart rate slow as her body took over, slipping into survival mode. She had been in situations before where she had been dismissed, belittled, but this felt different. She had never been this vulnerable, this exposed. She had always kept her head down, done her job, tried not to attract attention. But now, something was different. Dominic's voice cut through the silence, low and controlled, but with an undeniable edge of authority. What is this? His voice wasn't loud, but it held power that made the air in the room feel heavier. His gaze was still locked on his fiancée, who stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do. No one dared speak. Not even the waiters, who were holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. Then, Dominic took one slow, deliberate step forward, his eyes now fixed on Alana. The room seemed to hold its breath. He extended a hand to her, not to help her up, but to bring her back to her feet in his own way, by offering her a moment of respect she hadn't received from anyone else in this room. Alana hesitated, her mind racing. But in that moment, something clicked. She had been humiliated, but she wasn't broken. Slowly, she raised her head, meeting his gaze for the first time. What she saw in his eyes was not the cold, detached ruthlessness she expected. Instead, there was something else, something that spoke of power, but also of understanding, of something more than just the empire he had built. Dominic's gaze softened, just slightly, but it was enough. He turned toward his fiancée. "This is your last chance," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but with the weight of 1,000 decisions hanging in the air. "Leave. Now." The fiancée blinked in shock, her face flushing with anger. She opened her mouth to speak, but Dominic's glare stopped her cold. This time, he wasn't asking. He wasn't giving her room for negotiation. The tension in the room reached a breaking point. The sound of silence, now more deafening than the slap, had ever been. His fiancée, humiliated and furious, turned on her heel and stormed out of the restaurant, leaving the staff and guests in stunned silence. As the door slammed behind her, Alana stood there, still trying to process what had just happened. The room remained frozen for a moment longer, as if waiting for something to snap the tension, and then, as if on cue, the atmosphere shifted. The murmurs began, whispers of disbelief and awe. Dominic turned to Alana once again, his expression unreadable. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer now. Alana nodded, unable to speak, her mind still racing. She had been humiliated in front of the wealthiest, most powerful people in the city, but somehow, she had been spared the worst. And in that moment, she realized something profound. Sometimes, strength didn't come from silence or submission. Sometimes, it came from standing your ground, even in the face of overwhelming power. The restaurant was still in shock. As the door to the dining room slammed shut behind his fiancée, Dominic stood there for a moment, his gaze unwavering as he took in the scene. The tension in the room was thick, the air almost tangible with the weight of what had just transpired. No one spoke. No one moved. Alana could feel the stares of the guests burning into her, their eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief, curiosity, and judgment. But she didn't care. In that moment, nothing else mattered. She had been humiliated in front of everyone, but she had also witnessed something she hadn't expected. The Mafia boss, Dominic Romano, had chosen to stand up for her. He had chosen to act, not out of obligation, but because something in him had seen the injustice of what had happened. He wasn't a man who did favors. He was a man who took control, who owned every room he entered. But tonight, something about Alana had reached him. Slowly, he turned back toward her. His eyes softened ever so slightly, but the intensity never left them. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice still calm, but with a depth of concern that she hadn't expected. Alana looked up at him, her heart still racing. She nodded, her throat tight, too emotional to speak. He didn't press her for more. Instead, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod before turning to the staff. "Get back to work," he said simply, his voice commanding. And just like that, the spell was broken. The murmurs of the guests began to grow louder as the staff started moving again, but the energy in the room had shifted. Dominic turned to leave, but before he could, Alana heard his voice once more. "I'll speak to you later," he said, his tone carrying a weight that made her heart beat faster. His presence lingered in the room long after he had exited, and though the guests began to settle back into their meals, a sense of unease remained. The restaurant had just witnessed a shift. one that no one would forget anytime soon. Alana stood there for a moment, processing everything. She had never imagined a night like this. She had come to work, as she always did, to pay the bills and take care of her family. She never sought attention, never looked for anything other than to blend in and survive. But tonight, everything had changed. Her world had been turned upside down in a single moment, and she didn't know what would come next. She was still shaken, but something in her had shifted too. The fear that had gripped her in the moments after the slap was fading, replaced by something else, something stronger. She had stood up to the cruelty, even without saying a word. She had held her ground in the face of humiliation. And now, Dominic Romano had taken notice. The more she thought about it, the more her mind raced. Why had he chosen to intervene? What had made him stand up for her? She wasn't important. She wasn't anyone in his world. She was just a waitress, a nobody in the grand scheme of things. And yet, he had acted. She shook her head, trying to clear the confusion from her mind. But the reality of it settled over her again. She had been a part of something bigger now. Whatever happened next, she knew it wouldn't be business as usual. The next few days passed in a blur. Alana's thoughts were consumed with what had happened at the restaurant. She couldn't stop thinking about Dominic, about his cold, calculating presence, but also the hint of something else she had seen in his eyes. She had heard the rumors, whispers about him and his ruthless ways, about the empire he controlled with an iron fist. But no one had ever told her what it was like to see it firsthand. What did he want from her? Was this some kind of game to him? She didn't know. All she knew was that she couldn't forget the way he had looked at her after the slap, the way he had spoken to her, as if she mattered, as if her pain was something he could feel. The days dragged on, and it wasn't until late one evening that she got the call. It was a private number, but she recognized the voice immediately when it came through. Alana, it's Dominic Romano. I need to see you. She felt her breath catch in her throat. She had been expecting something, but not this. Her heart raced as she tried to steady herself. This was it. This was the moment when everything would change. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life had just taken a turn that would lead her down a path she hadn't prepared for. And whether she liked it or not, she was about to walk it. Alana's hands trembled as she held the phone to her ear. The voice on the other end was smooth, calm, with just the right amount of authority. It was Dominic Romano, the Mafia boss, the man who had changed everything for her in a single moment. She had expected the call, but that did nothing to prepare her for the weight of it. She had no idea what to expect, only that her life was about to shift in ways she couldn't yet imagine. You're free to go home for now, Alana, but I need to see you tomorrow. Same place, same time. Dominic's voice was crisp, direct. There was no room for refusal. Alana swallowed hard, nodding even though he couldn't see her. She didn't know what this meeting would be about, but she knew one thing for certain. It wouldn't be anything ordinary. She had felt it in his gaze that night. The way he had looked at her was unlike anything she had experienced. It wasn't pity. It wasn't manipulation. It was something else entirely. Something that made her question everything she knew about power and about herself. The next day, Alana arrived at the restaurant, her stomach tight with nerves. She was early, as she always was, a habit drilled into her. From years of working multiple jobs just to get by. The staff were still setting up, the tables gleaming under the soft light. But today the atmosphere felt different. The place felt almost alive with anticipation, though no one spoke a word about the events from the night before. She walked to the back, her footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The sound felt louder than usual, like each step was leading her towards something that was both thrilling and terrifying. When she reached the staff room, she paused. Was she ready for this? Was she ready for whatever was about to happen next? Before she could second-guess herself, the door to the private dining area opened, and there stood Dominic. He was exactly as she remembered, tall, imposing, his presence commanding the space around him. He didn't speak at first, just watched her with that same intense gaze. She could feel the weight of his eyes on her, as if he were peeling back every layer of her existence, searching for something beneath the surface. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and controlled. I hope you're not here for a simple apology, Alana, because that's not why I called you. She stood frozen, unsure of what to say. She had expected an apology, maybe an explanation, but this was different. He stepped forward, the air around him thick with the energy of someone who knew exactly what they wanted. and he wanted something from her. You're not just a waitress, Alana. You're someone who stands out. You see things others don't. That's what makes you different, he said, his voice sharp, cutting through the silence. Alana's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure where he was going with this, but the way he said it made her feel like she had been seen in a way she had never been before. For the first time, she felt something other than the crushing weight of invisibility that had defined her life for so long. Dominic continued, his tone steady, but with a hint of something that could almost be called admiration. Last night, you didn't crumble. You didn't break under the pressure. You stood your ground. You earned my respect. Alana's breath caught in her throat. Respect. He respected her? A woman who had been nothing more than a quiet servant in the shadows of this glamorous world, suddenly earning the respect of the most powerful man in the room. It was more than she could process in the moment. I don't know what you want from me, she whispered, her voice barely audible, but Dominic's gaze never wavered. I want you to help me, Alana. Help me see the things I might miss. The things that others might hide from me, he said, his voice hardening. You have a way of noticing what no one else does. I need that. She blinked, trying to process his words. Was this a test? Was he playing some kind of game? But Dominic didn't seem like the type to play games. He was a man of action, a man who got what he wanted. And right now, it seemed like he wanted her. But for what? You're asking me to help you? She asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. I don't even know what I could do for you. He leaned in slightly, his presence overwhelming. You see, Alana, in my world, there are many things that are kept hidden. Secrets, lies, betrayals. But you have an ability to see the truth, to understand people. And I need that. You're going to be more than just a waitress, Alana. You're going to be someone who helps me navigate this world of mine. Alana's mind raced. This was not what she had expected. She had thought that after everything, after the slap, after the tension, she would be cast aside, just another forgotten face in the crowd. But this was something else entirely. She didn't know if she was ready for this new path, but there was no turning back now. Dominic wasn't asking her to stand in the background anymore. He was asking her to step into the light, to become someone important in a world where power and influence ruled. She looked at him, her thoughts swirling, and for the first time, she saw the possibility of something bigger than herself. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And it was about to change everything. Alana stood there, her mind swirling with Dominic's words. She had been thrust into a world she never could have imagined, a world where the rules were different, where power was the currency, and her position was far from what she had ever imagined. Dominic Romano, the Mafia boss, had just asked her to help him navigate his empire, to become someone of importance, someone who would see the truth that others might overlook. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and at that moment, Alana felt both small and bigger than she had ever felt before. She didn't know if she was ready, but she was certain of one thing. There was no turning back. The weight of Dominic's words hung in the air like a challenge she couldn't ignore. In the days that followed, Alana found herself walking a fine line between fear and curiosity. She still worked at the restaurant, but now, her role was different. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. Dominic had given her a glimpse into his world, and with that came both an opportunity and a danger she couldn't escape. Every time Dominic looked at her, there was something else in his eyes, something that suggested he saw more than just a woman who had endured a slap in front of strangers. He saw potential. It was that potential that had led him to choose her. Alana had learned over the years to be invisible, to blend in, to survive without attracting attention. But now, in Dominic's presence, she could no longer hide. She had to confront her own power, her ability to see things that others missed. That was her gift, and Dominic had recognized it. He had called her into his world, and now she was expected to deliver. The first few days were disorienting. Alana had been assigned to different tasks, simple at first, overseeing certain transactions at the restaurant, watching how people interacted with Dominic's associates, picking up on subtle cues that others overlooked. It was nothing extravagant, but each task made her feel like she was entering deeper into a world she didn't yet understand. But she was starting to see the patterns. The way Dominic's people acted around him, the silent respect they gave him, the way they feared him but were also loyal to him. Alana began to understand the stakes of the world she was stepping into. As the days turned into weeks, Alana became more attuned to the details. She noticed the way the staff responded to certain guests, the way Dominic's business partners interacted with him, and the way he used his silence as a weapon. Dominic didn't need to raise his voice to command respect. He only needed to be present, to observe. And that's what Alana had to learn. She had to learn how to see the truth without ever having to ask. Dominic had a way of making people believe they were safe, even when they weren't. He was a master of deception, a puppet master pulling strings from the shadows. Alana was starting to see that now, and with each passing day, she was becoming more involved in his world. It was during one of their late meetings, after the restaurant had closed, when Alana finally understood what Dominic had been preparing her for. She had been sitting in the corner of the private dining room, observing the interactions between Dominic and one of his most trusted allies. The conversation was subtle, but Alana picked up on the tension in the room. There was something off about the deal being discussed, something that didn't sit right. She could feel it in her gut. As soon as the meeting ended, Dominic turned to her, his gaze piercing. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked, his voice calm but intense. Alana nodded, her heart racing. She hadn't spoken, hadn't said a word, but Dominic knew she had seen the cracks in the conversation. He smiled slightly. That's the first step, knowing when something is wrong before it even happens. "Alana, you're not just here to serve. You're here to help me see the truth. You're here to spot the lies before they destroy everything. That's the job I'm giving you." Alana's mind raced. She had thought she was simply helping him, watching, learning the ropes. But now, Dominic was giving her something far more dangerous. He was putting her in a position where she would be the one to detect betrayal, to uncover secrets. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like a boulder. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was an integral part of Dominic's world, a world filled with power, danger, and secrets. As Alana walked out of the meeting, her heart pounding in her chest, she realized that the road ahead would not be easy. She was no longer invisible. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. She was now part of something much bigger than herself, and she had no idea where it would lead. Alana sat in the small, dimly lit office behind the restaurant, her mind racing. The responsibility Dominic had placed on her shoulders was heavier than anything she had ever known. She had always been a survivor, doing what she could to make ends meet, keeping her head down and never asking for more. But now, she was part of something much bigger, something dangerous, and there was no turning back. The truth was, Alana didn't know if she was ready for what Dominic was asking of her. He had made it clear, she wasn't just there to observe anymore. She was part of his empire now, a piece of the puzzle that he needed to help him see the truth. And seeing the truth in Dominic's world meant understanding the lies, the betrayals, and the dark deals that kept everything running. But how could she spot the lies if she wasn't sure what she was looking for? Her thoughts were interrupted when the door opened, and Dominic walked in. His presence filled the room instantly, and for a moment, Alana felt the familiar wave of unease wash over her. But this time, there was no fear. This time, she felt something else, something she hadn't expected: trust. Dominic's eyes locked onto hers, and he didn't speak for a moment. It was as if he were gauging her, reading her thoughts. Finally, he broke the silence. "You've been quiet lately, Alana. Is something bothering you?" His voice was calm, but the weight of it made her feel exposed. Alana opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't know how to explain the storm that had been brewing inside her. Everything had changed so quickly, and now, she was standing in a world where everything she thought she knew no longer applied. She was no longer just a waitress. She was his eyes, his ears. She was a part of his operation, and that terrified her. "I'm just trying to figure it all out," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked over to the small desk and sat down, his posture relaxed but still commanding. He didn't need to say anything for her to understand that this was an invitation, not a demand. Alana hesitated, but then she took a deep breath and sat down across from him. She wasn't sure where to begin, but she knew she had to speak her mind. "You're asking me to trust you, to help you, but I don't know how. I've never been in this world. I've never seen it from the inside. How can I see the truth if I don't know what the lies look like?" Dominic's eyes softened for just a moment, and for the first time since they'd met, Alana saw a glimpse of the man behind the mask. He wasn't just a mafia boss. He was a man who had been shaped by the very world he controlled. A man who understood the power of silence and the danger of speaking too much. It's not about knowing what the lies look like, Alana, he said quietly. It's about knowing when something doesn't feel right. It's about trusting your instincts. You've survived this long by trusting yours. That's why I need you. Alana swallowed hard, her heart beating faster. She wasn't sure she was ready for this, but Dominic was right. She had survived by trusting her gut, by sensing when something was off, when something didn't sit right. But this was different. This wasn't just about survival. This was about loyalty. This was about loyalty to Dominic and to the world he was asking her to be a part of. She had always been invisible, never important enough to be noticed. But now, in Dominic's world, she had become someone who could make a difference. But at what cost? And how far was she willing to go? Alana's thoughts were interrupted as Dominic stood up and walked over to the window, his back to her. You'll start by helping me with something small, he said. There's a shipment coming in tomorrow night. It's critical that it goes smoothly. I need you to be there. Watch the people involved. See what they're really after. Alana's breath caught in her throat. A shipment? She hadn't signed up for this. She hadn't signed up for being involved in the shady deals that Dominic's empire was built on. But she knew she had no choice. This was the world she had entered now. There was no turning back. Dominic turned to face her, his eyes dark with a quiet intensity. You won't be alone, Alana. You'll have my people with you. But you'll be the one to decide who's trustworthy and who's not. You'll decide who gets to stay and who gets to go. He paused. For a moment, letting the weight of his words settle between them. I trust you to make the right call. Alana nodded, her mind reeling. This wasn't just about serving drinks and cleaning tables anymore. This was real power, real consequences, and she was about to step into the heart of it. As she stood up to leave, Dominic's voice stopped her. One more thing, he said. Don't let anyone underestimate you. You're more than just a waitress, Alana. You're a part of something much bigger now. And I'm counting on you. Alana walked out of the office, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of Dominic's trust settled heavily on her shoulders. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she knew one thing for sure. The path ahead would be anything but easy. The following evening, the air in the restaurant was thick with anticipation. The usual hustle and bustle of waiters and staff preparing for dinner service felt different. Tonight wasn't just another shift. Tonight, Alana was stepping into a new role, one that Dominic had carefully crafted for her. She had spent the day trying to prepare herself mentally, but the weight of his trust was still heavy on her shoulders. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was becoming part of something much larger. As the clock ticked closer to the hour, Alana stood by the back in trance, her eyes scanning the kitchen, the hallway leading to the private rooms. She had been told that the shipment would arrive soon, but what exactly it entailed, she wasn't sure. Dominic hadn't given her all the details, but then again, she knew by now that he never did. He wanted her instincts to guide her, and that meant trusting herself more than ever. Alana's thoughts were interrupted when the door to the office opened, and there stood Dominic, his presence commanding the room. He looked exactly as he did the night he had given her this task, calm, collected, yet there was a fire in his eyes that made Alana's heart skip a beat. He walked over to her, his gaze never leaving hers. You ready? He asked. His voice was low, measured, and for a split second, Alana could see the weight of responsibility resting on his shoulders as well. He wasn't just the Mafia boss. He was a man who had to make the hard decisions, the ones that could change the course of his empire. Alana nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She had no idea what she was about to face, but she had no choice now. She had to follow through. As the minutes ticked by, the usual rhythm of the restaurant service began to shift. Staff members started moving more efficiently, and the chatter of the guests grew louder, signaling the beginning of a busy night. But Alana couldn't shake the tension in the air. It felt like the calm before a storm. Dominic's eyes never left her as he took a seat in the back corner of the room, his presence a constant reminder of everything that was at stake. She felt his gaze even when she wasn't looking directly at him. It was as if he could see into her, knowing exactly what she was thinking. She was about to make her first real test. The door to the restaurant's private entrance opened, and Alana could feel her pulse quicken. A small group of men entered, their presence immediately setting the tone of the room. They weren't the usual clientele, and Alana could see the weight they carried. They were here for business. She glanced at Dominic, but he simply nodded, giving her the silent signal to do her job. She approached the group of men, her mind running through the instructions she had been given. Keep your eyes open. Trust your gut. Observe everything. As she walked toward them, she noticed the subtle tension in the air. These men weren't here for a casual dinner. There was something else at play. They didn't look her way as she set the drinks down, their focus entirely on the man sitting across from them, Dominic's right-hand man. But as she moved back to the bar, her instincts kicked in. One of the men, a large, burly figure, glanced at her, his eyes narrowing as if sizing her up. She froze for a moment, the unspoken threat in his gaze sending a chill down her spine. But she didn't flinch. She had learned long ago how to read people, how to know when something wasn't quite right. And this man, he wasn't here to play by the rules. As Alana turned to leave, she caught a quick flash of movement. One of the other men, quiet, unassuming, slipped a small envelope into the hands of Dominic's right-hand man. The exchange was subtle, but Alana saw it. She had seen enough. The shipment. It was a cover. Something was being smuggled in, hidden in plain sight. Alana's pulse raced, but she kept her composure, moving back to Dominic's corner without drawing attention to herself. She approached him, her heart pounding in her chest. Without a word, she leaned down and whispered, "There's something in the envelope. It's not just about the shipment." Dominic's eyes flickered with interest, but his face remained calm, unreadable. "You sure?" he asked, his voice low. Alana nodded, her gut telling her everything she needed to know. "I saw the exchange. It's not just business. It's something else." Dominic didn't speak for a moment, his gaze shifting toward the group of men who were now engrossed in conversation. He nodded slowly, a quiet acknowledgement that Alana had done what he asked. "Good," he said quietly. "Keep watching. And if anything else happens, you come to me." Alana's heart was still racing, but she kept her composure. She had done what was needed. She had seen the lie before it was fully realized. But now, she had to figure out what to do with it. As the night wore on, the restaurant began to empty, the clinking of silverware and the murmur of voices fading away. Alana remained at her post, watching Dominic as he spoke with his men. She was no longer just a waitress. She had crossed the line. She had seen the truth, and now, there was no turning back. As the final guests left, Dominic approached her, his face softening slightly. "You did well tonight, Alana," he said, his tone genuine. "But this is only the beginning. You've seen how deep the game goes. Now, you need to decide where you stand." Alana nodded slowly, her mind still reeling from the events of the night. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. It would be a journey that would change everything. The next few days felt like a blur for Alana. Every interaction, every glance from Dominic, felt loaded with meaning. She had crossed a line in his world, a world she hadn't fully understood until now, and there was no going back. The responsibility that came with it was heavier than anything she had carried before, but there was also something undeniable in the pit of her stomach, a sense of purpose, a sense of power. Alana knew that she was no longer just a part of the background. She had become an active player in a world of secrets, lies, and dangerous games. She spent the next several days shadowing Dominic and his trusted allies, observing their movements, and learning how to read the room. The subtleties of behavior, the quiet tensions, the unspoken rules that governed everything. She had seen enough to understand the stakes. Every decision, every look, could change the balance of power. She was learning quickly, but the more she saw, the more questions she had. What was Dominic truly asking of her? What was it that he saw in her, in the way she could pick up on things others missed? She wasn't sure, but there was no time to question it. Dominic had put his trust in her, and now it was her turn to deliver. It wasn't long before she was called into a meeting with Dominic. This time, there were more men in the room, all of them connected to the operations that ran Dominic's empire. As soon as she entered, their eyes fell on her, a mixture of curiosity and skepticism in their stares. She could feel their judgment, their quiet calculation. Alana didn't flinch. She had learned not to react, to keep her focus steady. Dominic sat at the head of the table, his presence larger than life. There was something magnetic about him, something that commanded respect without a word. Tonight, however, his usual calm was replaced with a coldness that made the hairs on the back of Alana's neck stand up. He looked at her with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. "We have a problem," he said, his voice sharp. Alana could feel the weight of his gaze on her, as if he was testing her. He wasn't just looking for an answer. He was looking for something more. A reaction. A sign that she understood. He gestured to one of his men, who placed a folder on the table in front of her. "Open it," Dominic ordered, his voice low but insistent. Alana hesitated for just a moment before she complied, flipping the folder open. Inside, there were several documents, contracts, and a series of photographs. Her eyes scanned the images, and it didn't take long for her to understand the gravity of what was in front of her. These weren't just photos of shipments. These were photos of people, important people, who were connected to Dominic's business. And someone had betrayed them. She could feel the tension in the room rise as she realized the implications. The people in the photos were part of the network Dominic had carefully cultivated, and now, it seemed, someone had broken that trust. There were whispers among the men, but they fell silent as Dominic's eyes fixed on Alana. She could feel the weight of his gaze pressing down on her. This was the moment. This was the test. Who did this? Dominic's voice cut through the silence like a knife. Alana looked up at him, her mind racing. The answer wasn't in the photographs or the contracts. It was in the details, in the way the men reacted to the situation, in the subtle shifts in the room. She took a deep breath and glanced back at the documents in front of her. The betrayal wasn't just about the shipment. It was about trust. Someone had violated that trust, and it was clear who had done it. She didn't have all the facts, but she knew enough to make the call. "It's him," she said quietly, pointing to one of the men seated at the table. The room fell silent. The man she had pointed to stiffened, his face paling. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Dominic's eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice steady but carrying a dangerous edge. Alana nodded. She didn't need to explain further. The man's reaction said everything. He had been caught. Dominic's gaze never wavered as he stood up from the table and walked toward the man, who now looked like a trapped animal. The tension in the room was unbearable, the air thick with anticipation. Dominic didn't speak a word as he stood in front of the man, his presence suffocating. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, Dominic spoke, his voice cold and final. "You know the consequences," he said quietly. And with that, the man's fate was sealed. The room remained still as Dominic turned back to Alana, his expression softening ever so slightly. "You did well, Alana," he said, his voice low. "You've earned my trust." Alana didn't know what to feel. She had just been a part of something that was far bigger than herself. But as she looked at Dominic, standing tall and unshaken, she realized that in this world, there was no room for hesitation. You either played the game, or you got lost in it. As the meeting ended and the men filed out of the room, Alana remained in her seat, her thoughts racing. She had made her first real decision, and she knew that there was no going back. Dominic had put his trust in her, and now, she had to prove that she could handle the weight of it. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: she was no longer just a spectator. She was part of this world, and she had to decide how far she was willing to go. The night after the meeting with Dominic, Alana's mind was still racing. She had witnessed firsthand how quickly things could change in Dominic's world, and how one decision could alter everything. She had made her first big call, and it had paid off. The man who had betrayed them was dealt with swiftly, without hesitation. The room had watched in silence, their eyes on Alana, but she didn't flinch. Dominic had trusted her, and she had proven herself worthy of that trust. But now, there was something else in the air, a new kind of weight, a new kind of responsibility. Alana couldn't escape the reality of what she had become a part of. This world was far from what she had known. It was a place where loyalty meant everything, where power shifted at the slightest movement, and where secrets were currency. She had crossed a line, and now she was a part of that world, whether she was ready for it or not. The next few days felt like an endless cycle. Alana continued to shadow Dominic and his associates, picking up on the nuances of their interactions, understanding the subtle power plays that drove the empire. She was learning quickly, but each new lesson left her more aware of how much she didn't know. There was no manual for this world, no guide on how to survive in the undercurrent of power that flowed through the veins of the Mafia. And yet, there was something intoxicating about it. The feeling of power, of being in control, even if only for a moment, was like a drug. She had always been the quiet observer, the one who kept to herself. But now, she was stepping into a role where her observations mattered. Every detail, every interaction, could lead to something bigger, something more dangerous. As the days went by, Dominic's behavior towards her shifted subtly. He was still the same, imposing figure she had first encountered, but there was an underlying change. He seemed to trust her more, rely on her observations and instincts. It wasn't just about the tasks he assigned her. It was about the way he looked at her, the way he spoke to her. There was respect in his eyes now, something she hadn't seen before. But there was also something else, a warning, a challenge. He knew that the world he operated in was ruthless, and if Alana wanted to be a part of it, she had to be ready to face the consequences. There was no room for mistakes. It was late one evening when the next test came. Alana had just finished a shift and was about to leave when Dominic called her into the back office. As she walked in, she noticed the tension in the air. He was standing by the window, his back to her, looking out at the darkened city streets. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a lamp on his desk. When he turned to face her, his expression was unreadable. "I need you to handle something for me," he said quietly. The tone of his voice made her stomach tighten. "What is it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "There's someone who's been leaking information," Dominic said. "Someone close to me. I need you to find out who it is." His words sent a chill down Alana's spine. A leak? That was the kind of betrayal that could bring down empires. But Dominic wasn't asking for help. He was commanding it, and there was no room for hesitation. Alana nodded, though her heart was racing. She had no idea where to start, but she knew one thing. She couldn't afford to fail. The next few days were a blur of investigation. Alana used her new position, her access to Dominic's operations, to gather information. She spoke to the right people, watched the right conversations, and picked up on the smallest details that others might miss. The tension was mounting. Every interaction felt like a clue, and with each step, Alana grew more certain of what she had to do. But as she delved deeper into the investigation, something began to feel off. She could feel the pressure building, the stakes growing higher with each passing moment. And then, she found it. The leak was someone she had never expected. It was one of Dominic's most trusted men, someone who had been in the inner circle for years. Alana's heart sank as she processed the information. How had she missed it? How had no one else seen it? But there it was, clear as day. The leak was the person she had trusted the most, the one who had been so careful, so elusive. Dominic had trusted him too, and now, he was the one who had betrayed that trust. The weight of the discovery hit Alana like a ton of bricks. She wasn't sure what to do with it, but she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a simple mistake. This was a threat to everything Dominic had built. And now, it was her job to decide what to do about it. When she returned to Dominic's office that night, she was ready. She had the information, and she knew what had to be done. As she stepped into the room, Dominic didn't speak immediately. He just watched her, his gaze piercing. "Have you found anything?" he asked, his voice low. Alana nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I found the leak." Dominic's eyes darkened, and he didn't ask for more details. He already knew. But there was a question that lingered in the air. What would Alana do with this information? How far was she willing to go? As Alana stood there, the weight of the moment pressed down on her. She had crossed a line once again. She wasn't just an observer anymore. She was a part of the decisions that would shape Dominic's world. And now, the question was clear. Could she handle it? Alana's hands shook as she stood in front of Dominic, the weight of the revelation pressing down on her. The man who had been the closest to Dominic, the one who she had never suspected, had been leaking information for months. It wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a direct threat to the empire Dominic had built. Her mind raced as she thought about the next steps, but there was no room for hesitation. Dominic was watching her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, probing. "Have you thought about what comes next?" His voice was calm, almost too calm. It sent a chill down Alana's spine. She had the answer, but saying it out loud made everything real. The man who had betrayed them would have to be dealt with. There was no other option. "He can't be allowed to stay," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding. Dominic's gaze softened just slightly. "Good. You've learned to see the game for what it is." He paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. There was no comfort in his approval, only the cold understanding that she had just taken another step into his world, a world that didn't allow for mistakes or mercy. Alana stood there, unsure of what was coming next, but Dominic spoke again, this time with a quiet intensity. You've done well, Alana. But now, you need to understand something deeper. In this world, everything is connected. One betrayal is never just about the one person. It's about the message it sends. If we let this slide, others will follow. And that can't happen. Alana swallowed hard, her stomach twisting. Dominic was right. The consequences of this betrayal would ripple out, touching every part of the operation. It wasn't just about the man who had betrayed them. It was about making sure that the people who worked for Dominic, the ones who relied on him, knew that they couldn't get away with this kind of disloyalty. She wasn't just helping him maintain power. She was helping him send a message. Dominic continued, his voice quieter now, but still commanding. You have to decide how far you're willing to go, Alana. You've already stepped into a world that most people can't even imagine. But there's no turning back now. You've seen the consequences of what happens when trust is broken. And you'll be the one to decide what happens next with this man. Alana's mind was spinning. She had never imagined herself in this position, making decisions that affected more than just her own survival. She had always kept to the shadows, never asking for attention, always just trying to get by. But now, she was being asked to make decisions that could destroy lives. It was overwhelming, but there was something else, something deep inside her that pushed her forward. She wasn't the same person she had been before this all started. She had learned things, seen things, done things that had changed her. The hesitation that had once defined her was slowly fading, replaced by a hard resolve. She had become part of this world, whether she liked it or not. The next few hours passed in a blur as Alana worked with Dominic and his people to handle the fallout from the betrayal. They discussed the best course of action, strategizing how to deal with the man who had betrayed them. Alana didn't know all the details, but she didn't need to. She knew what had to be done. As night fell, Dominic gave the order. The man who had been caught would be taken care of, quietly, efficiently. No fanfare, no emotion, just another piece of the puzzle falling into place. But even as Alana worked alongside Dominic's team, part of her couldn't shake the weight of it all. She had just made a decision that would alter the course of someone's life. But in this world, that was what it took to survive. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The world she had stepped into was one of shadows, of power, of violence. And she was no longer just an observer. She was a player in the game. And with each step she took, she understood more clearly the price of loyalty and the cost of betrayal. Dominic didn't speak much after the decision was made, but when the deed was done, he found Alana again, standing alone in the corner of the room. You did well, he said, his voice soft, but there was something in his eyes that was hard to place. Alana nodded, the weight of the night's events settling into her bones. She hadn't expected to feel anything, but now, as she stood there, she couldn't deny the rush of something powerful. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming part of something far bigger than herself. And as Dominic's eyes met hers, she knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more decisions, more betrayals, more consequences. But for the first time, Alana felt like she had a place in this world. She wasn't just a bystander. She was in the game now, and she was ready to play. The days that followed the betrayal were quiet, almost too quiet. Alana was still processing what had happened, the decision, the consequences, and the weight of everything that had come with it. The man who had been caught leaking information was gone, just like that. No one spoke of him anymore, and the operation carried on, as smooth as ever. But for Alana, it wasn't so simple. She had made a decision, a life-altering one, and now she had to live with it. She wasn't just a part of Dominic's world anymore. She was his trusted ally, someone who had been tested and had proven herself. It was a role she wasn't sure she was ready for, but one that she had to step into, whether she was prepared or not. Dominic had made it clear that there were no half measures in his world. Once you crossed the line, there was no going back. And Alana had crossed it. She had felt the weight of that responsibility from the moment she had pointed out the traitor in their midst. But as the days wore on, something changed. Alana's confidence grew. She started to notice things she hadn't before. The subtle shifts in behavior, the tiny clues that told her when something wasn't right. It was like a switch had been flipped, and suddenly, she was seeing everything with a clarity she hadn't known she had. But even with this newfound confidence, there was still an unease in her chest. She wasn't sure where this path would take her, and the stakes had never felt higher. Dominic had trusted her, but how far was she willing to go? And more importantly, how far was he willing to go with her? A week passed, and things began to settle down. But as Alana had learned by now, in Dominic's world, nothing ever stayed quiet for long. One evening, she was once again called into his office. The request was simple: another task, another decision. But this time, there was something different in the air. As she walked into the office, she could feel the tension thickening around them. Dominic was standing by the window, his back to her, staring out at the city. It was a familiar scene, one she had grown used to, but tonight, it felt heavier. When he turned to face her, his eyes were darker than usual, harder. He didn't speak at first, but the silence between them felt charged. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and purposeful. "I need you to do something for me, Alana, something I can't do myself." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had done things for him before, but this felt different. She took a step forward, her heart pounding. "What do you need?" she asked, her voice steady, even though her nerves were anything but. "There's a man," Dominic began, his eyes never leaving hers. "He's been undermining my operations, trying to get ahead, working with other families, and it's time we dealt with it." Alana felt her stomach tighten. She had already been in situations where loyalty and betrayal were at the forefront, but this felt like a step further into a world she hadn't fully grasped yet. Dominic continued, his gaze hardening. "This man has to be taken care of, but not in the way we've done before. I need him to see the consequences of his actions, to understand that there are no second chances in my world." Alana's mind raced, but she didn't speak. She could feel the weight of Dominic's words. This wasn't just about handling the problem. This was about making an example of someone, and she was going to be a part of it. Dominic's eyes flickered to her, gauging her reaction. He could see the hesitation in her, but he didn't push. He knew that she would make the right decision. "This is your decision, Alana. You've proven yourself before. Now prove it again." The words hung in the air, thick with meaning. It was a test, she realized. A test of her loyalty, of her ability to make the hard choices. It was one thing to deal with a betrayal from someone on the outside, but this was different. This was someone who had been with Dominic for a long time, someone who had earned his trust. And now, they had to pay the price. Alana didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this level of involvement, but she knew there was no turning back. Dominic had put his faith in her, and now, she had to show him that she could handle the weight of it. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'll do it," she said, her voice unwavering. "I'll handle it." Dominic's gaze softened slightly, but his expression remained hard. "I knew I could count on you," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "But remember, this world isn't for the faint of heart. Once you're in, you can't turn back." Alana nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. This was no longer just about surviving. It was about thriving in a world where loyalty and betrayal were two sides of the same coin. She was in it now, fully, and there was no turning back. As she left the office, Alana felt a mix of fear and excitement coursing through her. She didn't know how this would end, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer just a pawn in someone else's game. She was playing the game herself. Alana stood outside the building, her breath steady but her heart racing. The weight of what she had just agreed to was still settling in. Dominic had asked her to make the hard call again, but this time, it was different. This was someone she had known, someone who had been in the family for years, and yet, there was no hesitation in her decision. The world Dominic had pulled her into was unforgiving, and she had learned quickly that the lines between loyalty and betrayal were razor thin. She had to be ready for anything. As she stepped into the restaurant, the familiar sounds of clinking silverware and murmured conversations greeted her, but tonight, it felt different. The air was thick with the knowledge of what was coming, even though no one spoke of it. The staff moved with a quiet urgency, as though they too felt the weight of the situation. When she entered Dominic's office, he was standing by the window, as he often did. His back was to her, but Alana knew he was aware of her presence. His posture, the way his shoulders were set, told her that something was coming, something bigger than anything they had faced before. She could feel the tension in the room, the invisible threads pulling everything taut. Dominic turned slowly, his eyes locking with hers. There was no warmth, no softness in his gaze. There was only the calm certainty of a man who had made up his mind, who had already seen the endgame. "It's time," he said, his voice steady, almost too calm. Alana nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The last few days had been a whirlwind, and now she had to follow through with the decision she had made. There was no going back. Dominic gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, the tension in her body palpable. She had become a part of this world, and now it was time to take her place. "The man we spoke of," Dominic said, his voice hardening, "is a threat to everything we've built. He's been playing both sides, and now it's time to make sure he understands the consequences." Alana's stomach tightened. She had been in the shadows for so long, but now she was being asked to make the final call. She could feel the weight of Dominic's trust in her. The stakes had never been higher. She had seen the cruelty that ran through his world, and she had learned that mercy was a luxury few could afford. Dominic wasn't asking for hesitation. He was asking for action. Alana swallowed hard. She didn't know if she was ready for this, but she knew there was no room for doubt. This was the moment when everything would be decided. She had to be strong, for herself, for Dominic, for the empire he had built. This was no longer about survival. This was about loyalty and power. She nodded. "I understand," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm swirling inside her. Dominic's eyes softened slightly, but there was still that edge to them, that hardness that told her this wasn't a moment for compassion. It was a moment for action. "You've earned your place here, Alana," he said, his voice low. "But remember, in this world, mercy isn't always an option." She didn't need him to say more. She knew what he meant. There were no second chances. She had already crossed one line. Now, she had to cross another. The man would be dealt with, swiftly and decisively. There was no room for negotiation, no room for mercy. Alana stood in silence for a moment, her mind racing. The world Dominic had introduced her to was one of shadows and power, and now, it was her turn to play her part. She had learned to read the room, to understand the delicate balance of power, but this was different. This was the point of no return. Dominic stepped toward her, his presence overwhelming. "You're ready," he said. "I know you are. But you need to make it clear that you're not just playing by the rules. You're making them." Alana took a deep breath, gathering her strength. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this, but there was no backing down now. The decision was hers. She knew what she had to do. As she left the office, her mind was focused, her heart steady. The man she had to deal with would be taken care of, and there would be no hesitation. This was the world she was now a part of, and in this world, loyalty and power were everything. She wasn't just a pawn anymore. She was a player, and it was time to make her move. As the restaurant began to quiet down, Alana stood at the back, watching the last few guests leave. She could feel the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was her life. She was no longer just a waitress. She had become part of something much larger, and now, she had to prove she was worthy of her place in it. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same. The air in the restaurant felt heavy as Alana stood in the back hallway, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Everything had changed. She had crossed a line from which there was no return, and she knew that. Dominic had trusted her with everything. His empire, his plans, his vision. And now, it was up to her to prove she could live up to that trust. The man she had been ordered to handle was gone, and his absence left a void in the power structure. But the game wasn't over. It never was in Dominic's world. This was the world she had stepped into, and now, it was hers to navigate. Alana had proven herself time and time again, but each test was a reminder that loyalty in Dominic's world was fragile. It was something you earned every day, something you held onto tightly, or it would slip through your fingers. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming a key player, someone whose actions shaped the future. But the weight of it all was becoming harder to bear. As she walked into the private office, she found Dominic standing by the window again, watching the city below. The scene felt familiar, but there was something different in his demeanor today. There was no warmth in his gaze, only a sharp focus as he turned to face her. The usual air of dominance surrounding him was heavier than ever. "You've done well, Alana," he said quietly, his voice low, and for the first time, she saw something like respect in his eyes. "But this is just the beginning. The job isn't over." Alana nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and apprehension. She had made it through the first round, But she knew this world didn't stop. There was always something more. The decisions, the actions, they never stopped. Dominic's voice broke through her thoughts again. You've seen how quickly the game can change. You've learned the rules, but now, it's time to make them. You're no longer just a part of the operation. You're helping steer it. Alana didn't respond immediately. His words were heavy, but she understood. This was what she had been working toward. The moment when she wasn't just following orders, but making the calls herself. But with that power came consequences. Dominic continued, his voice steady but filled with intent. I need you to help me see the next move. The others are starting to question me. The loyalty that once seemed unshakable is beginning to crack. You've seen it too, haven't you? Alana felt a jolt run through her. She had noticed the undercurrents, the subtle shifts. The tension among the people in Dominic's circle was palpable, even if they didn't speak of it directly. People were starting to doubt. The last betrayal had been a wake-up call, but this new wave of uncertainty threatened to unravel everything. She hadn't just noticed it. She had felt it. Yes, she said, her voice unwavering. I've seen the cracks, and I'll help you fix them. Dominic gave a small nod, a rare sign of approval. Good, he said. That's why you're here. I need you to go deeper. Find out who's testing me, who's thinking of turning. You'll know who it is before they even make their move. Alana's pulse quickened. This wasn't just about following the chain of command anymore. This was about loyalty, her loyalty. The moment she had been dreading was finally here. She had to decide how far she was willing to go, not just for Dominic, but for herself. In his world, loyalty didn't come without a price. But she was in this now. There was no going back. The next few days were a blur of observation, of silent judgments, of watching the people around her and seeing the smallest shifts. Every conversation, every interaction was a clue. She began to see the divisions, the quiet dissent among the ranks. But even as she started to uncover the truth, there was something else growing inside her. A question she hadn't dared ask herself until now. Was this the life she wanted? As she sat at the back of the restaurant, watching Dominic work with his closest allies, she saw the faces of the men and women who had been with him from the start. They were loyal, yes, but there was something in their eyes, a weariness, a hunger, a desire for something more. They weren't just loyal to Dominic. They were loyal to the power he represented, to the empire he had built. And that was the part that scared her. Because now, she was part of that. She was helping build it. And she knew that meant she would eventually have to make decisions that would affect more than just her future. It would affect everyone around her. As the days wore on, Alana became more attuned to the inner workings of the operation. She had earned her place, but now, she had to protect it. Protect Dominic's empire. Protect the people who depended on him and on her. One evening, as she sat with Dominic in the office, her mind racing with the next steps, he turned to her and spoke again, this time in a softer tone. You've done more than I expected, Alana. You've proven yourself. But I need you to understand something. This world we live in, it doesn't care about who you are, what you've done. It only cares about what you can do next. And if you want to survive, you have to be ready for that. Alana looked at him, her heart steady, but her mind still torn. She had crossed so many lines, and yet, there was still so much more to do. And as Dominic stood up, his gaze focused on the future, Alana realized one undeniable truth. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was part of the game. And in this game, the only way to win was to keep playing. The question now was how far she would go, and what she would sacrifice to get there.